Good afternoon, everyone. I'll call this regularly scheduled City Council meeting to order. Joining me in the chamber is Chief Administrative Officer Joan Thompson, City Clerk Tatiana Defoe, and Manager of Communication Mike Bites. Staff joining us on the phone are Director of Community Service David St. Louis, Director of Infrastructure and Development Services Ed Delovic, Director of Social Services Kim McElroy, Fire Chief John Parody, Janice Bernis, Acting Director of Corporate Services, Jeff Lunison, Manager of Development Services, Jody Atkins, Council Clerk Secretary, and Allison Jordan, Events Coordinator. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest at this time? Seeing none. Item 3 is adoption of the minutes of the Stratford, or the special council meeting of the City of Stratford from May 29th. Moving Councillor Beattie and seconding Councillor Burback. Discussion. Seeing none, all in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. Item 4 is an adoption of the addenda for today's agenda. And on that addenda is item 5.3 with regard to the sale of lots in Wright Business Park, and to add delegates to the Planning and Heritage Committee meeting dated June 8th for zone change application Z05-19. Would someone move adoption of the addenda? Councillor Ritzma and Councillor Ingram. All those in favor? Opposed, if any, and that's carried. The report of the Committee of the Whole in camera session from the May 25th, 2020 session, COVID-19 financial relief measures. And they are as follows: that the normal school rent will be reduced by 50% for 2020. The Queen Street parking lot lease payment be waived for 2020. The hot dog cart refreshment vehicle vendor adjacent to Memorial Gardens lease payment be waived for 2020. And the Art in the Park lease payment be waived for 2020. Is there a mover for that? Councillor Vasilakos and Councillor Henderson. Discussion. Councillor Clifford.
Yeah, I was going to ask, if we're not having a hot dog, is there any chance to have a picnic table or two up at that place if the hot dog guy is not going to be there? Is there an opportunity to have some picnic tables there?
That is one of the considered locations. It is adjacent to Memorial Gardens, and we did say that we would speak to the Legion and Army and Navy about that, so that is under consideration. Is there anything further? If not, all those in favor? Opposed, if any, and that's carried. Item 5.2 from the June 8, 2020 session under Municipal Act 2001 was the proposed and pending acquisition and disposal of land by the corporation. Advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communication necessary for that purpose, and a personnel matter about an identifiable individual, including municipal employees or local board employees. And at the in-camera session, direction was given on the first two items. Item 5.3 has been added, it's on the addenda, and it is that from the June 8, 2020 session under Municipal Act 2001, that sale of lots 1 and 2, Plan 44M38, City of Stratford Wright Business Park to 274-2051 Ontario Limited Industrial Contracting Solutions / Trimac Group of Companies be authorized for the sale of the land, and that the conveyance bylaw be adopted. Moved by Councillor Bunting and seconded by Councillor Vasilakos. Discussion. Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed, if any, and that's carried. Thank you. Item 6, there are no hearings of deputations and presentations scheduled for today. So we'll go to item 7, orders of the day. And we have correspondence from the Ontario Energy Board. It's for the information of council, and it's that Enbridge Gas Inc. has applied to the Ontario Energy Board for approval of a system expansion surcharge, a temporary connection surcharge, and an hourly allocation factor. And the surcharges are used to recover the costs of natural gas expansion projects, and the allocation factor is used to assess feasibility of projects. To view the full application Regarding the public hearing, please contact the clerk's office. 7.2 is a resolution of the Stratford Tourism Alliance loan status and the staff recommendation that the report titled Stratford Tourism Alliance loan status be received for information. Moved by Councillor Bunting and seconded by Councillor Burbach. Discussion. Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Item 7.3 is near-term project updates, water pollution control plan, and the staff recommendation that the report titled Near-Term Project Updates, Water Pollution Control Plan be received for information. Moved by Councillor Vasilakos, seconded by Councillor Ingram. Discussion. Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Item 7.4 is a resolution, residential blue box program, transition to full producer responsibility. And the recommendation is that the City of Stratford recommends to the Association of Municipalities of Ontario and the Minister of the Environment, Conservation and Parks that the city is prepared to transfer the blue box program to full producer responsibility as early as May 2023, subject to regulations developed by the province and the wind-up plan. Councillor Gaffney and Councillor Henderson moving and seconding. Discussion. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? And that's carried. Thank you. Item 7.5 is a resolution, financial statements, and commentary for Festival Hydro. And the recommendation is that Festival Hydro Inc. 2019 audited financial statements and commentary for the period ending December 31st, 2019 be approved by Council, that Festival Hydro's financial statements and commentary for the period ending March 31st, 2020 be received for information, and that the attached resolution of the sole shareholder of Festival Hydro be signed by the Mayor and Clerk, and that the financial statements of Festival Hydro as of December 31st, 2019, consisting of the balance sheet as of December 31st, 2019, the statement of income for the year ended December 31st, 2019, and the statement of retained earnings for the year ended December 31st, 2019, and the notes to the financial statements and the report of the auditors thereon dated April 28, 2020, be and the same are hereby approved and adopted, and that KPMG be and they are hereby appointed auditors of the corporation until the next annual meeting at a remuneration to be fixed by the directors being hereby authorized to fix such remuneration, and that all acts, contracts, bylaws, proceedings, appointments, elections, and payments enacted, made, done, and taken by the directors and officers of the corporation since the last annual meeting of the shareholder as the same are set out or referred to in the minutes of the meetings and resolution of the board of directors, or referred to and given effect to an aforementioned financial statements be and the same are hereby approved, ratified, and confirmed. Councillor Clifford, you will move. Councillor Bunting, you'll second. Discussion. Councillor Seven.
I just have a little bit of concern about the sort of all-encompassing general legal sort of terminology. Most importantly, at the very end where it says, and that all acts, contracts, bylaws, etc., be approved, ratified, and confirmed. I just don't see how that's really possible for us to do that. And I wondered if we could have sort of we had a legal opinion on that or anything like that.
I can ask Ms. Thompson, but this has actually been drafted by our legal counsel.
Okay, that's fair enough. Thank you.
Okay, and it is required by us, and it is a standard from the Ontario Business Corporations Act. Councillor Vasilakos.
Sorry, yeah, I was just going to say that this is standard legal language that I'm pretty much every board that I sit on, they use the same language and it's the same resolution. So it's standard.
Thank you. It's been moved by Councillor Clifford and seconded by Councillor Bunting that item resolution 7.5 be adopted. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? And it's carried. Item 7.6 is a resolution of the same wording, and it's for Festival Hydro Services, Inc., and it was with regard to their financial statements from December 31st, 2019. Councillor Gaffney and Councillor Beattie will move and second. Discussion. Councillor Vasilakos.
This is not so much to this resolution, but I'm just wondering if, once the emergency is all over and there's a bit more time, if someone could come from Rhizome and talk to us, present to us a little bit about their current status and future plans and things around that. As long as I've been on council, sort of Rhizome has been sort of just at that same level, and I'm just wondering if we could get a little overview of their strategic planning or anything like that, just because we haven't had an update recently.
Yes, I think the last major project they undertook was a partnership with Whiteman for fiber at every home, and that's what's consumed them the last 3 years. Okay. All right, it's been moved and seconded by Councillor Gaffney and Councillor Beattie. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Item 7.7 is correspondence, and it's a call for nominations to the 2020 to 2022 AMO Board of Directors. Any nominations from council? Councillor Ritzma?
I would certainly put my name forward for that board.
Councillor Gaffney?
I will move that to be so.
Councillor Seven, you'll second that? Thank you. Any others wishing their name to stand? Well, then it would be that Stratford City Council endorses Councillor Martin Ritzma in standing for election to the Board of Directors of the Association of Municipalities of Ontario for the 2020 to 2022 term. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? And that's carried. Thank you. Item 7.8 is a resolution regarding the Stratford Alfresco project, and it's the staff recommendation that the report entitled Stratford Alfresco Project during COVID-19 follow-up report as received for information, and that council provide authorization to move forward with phase 1 related to the installation of select tables and umbrellas on Tom Patterson Island under the guidance of the Fire Service and here in Perth Public Health. Councillor Vasilakos and Councillor Burback moving and seconding. Discussion. Councillor Henderson.
Yes, I was just wondering, sort of my understanding of this is to sort of help the businesses in town and to have places where people could go and sit and then they can, bring their lunch out to them. So what would be the purpose of having it on Tom Patterson Island?
The plan would be that there'd be more areas for takeout. More areas for takeout.
Sorry, I couldn't hear you.
This would allow for more areas of takeout and for people to stay in the park and eat them outdoors. Councillor Clifford, then Councillor Gaffney.
Yeah, I also have concerns with that. I think what's going to happen if we put on Tom Patterson, and I brought this up before, people that are going to have picnics will be down there a lot more. I think it would be a lot more advantageous if we had it up by like the courthouse at Shakespeare Park, or where I talked about earlier, up where the hot dog people would be. So I don't have anything against it, but I don't think it's going to help the people with the restaurants. I don't think it's going to be a great idea having on Tom Patterson.
Thank you. Councillor Gaffney.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I agree with what Bonnie was asking, and Tom also. I don't quite understand. We've got plenty of picnic tables in the park. Why are we buying extraneous picnic tables to take into the park? And the other thing is, I've looked at those picnic tables. I took a drive out to CRP to have a look at the one they have out in front lawn on display. Do these picnic tables actually provide the necessary separation between, does it provide the 6 foot or 2 meter separation? They look awfully small for that. So that's my question. Thank you.
So Councillor Gaffney, I'm not sure whether the table you saw on the lawn of CRP is actually the one that is proposed to be purchased. So I would just say that'd be my first. Secondly, under the regulations announced today at 1 p.m. by the province, tables are allowed to have a maximum of 6 people at them, and there is no physical spacing been listed so far in the regulations provided by the Chief Medical Officer of Health.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
Thank you. Councillor Ritzma.
question with regards to social distancing. As people make their way to Tom Patterson Island, crossing the bridge, how does that work? Is there a concern with regards to, or will it be, you know, people will watch on one side, if nobody's coming, then go, etc.?
Chief Parity had raised this concern, so I'll allow him to maybe speak to it if possible.
Thank you.
Chief Parity. Okay, would either Allison Jordan or David St. Louis be able to speak to it in the absence of the fire chief?
Good afternoon, Mr. It's David St. Louis. Through you, there would be signage on each side of the bridge, similar to what you would see when there's one-way traffic, to allow for people to cross in one direction one at a time, or at a time.
Thank you. Chief, do you have anything to add?
Yes, I finally got my, through your worship, I figured out the mute button here. That was just a concern, like David mentioned, that came up through CLT and some email exchanges, was keeping that social distancing when crossing the bridge over to the Tom Patterson Island, following the Huron-Perth Public Health guidance of the distancing, social distancing, and when you can't have that social distancing and the PPE required to do so. So we came up with a plan that the signage really is the best way. You know, if you're all in the same family coming across, and just being courteous to each other as citizens going back and forth.
Thank you. Councillor Clifford, then Councillor Burback.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, how many tables are we planning to have on the island compared with how many we have behind City Hall? Like, I'm curious what the path is on tables and the locations of tables.
Allison or David, would you be in a position to answer that information or provide that information?
It's David again, through you, Mr. Mayor. They will adhere to 3-meter distancing, so the amount of tables that would be allowed on Tom Patterson Island has not yet determined yet. The spacing plan hasn't been worked out, I don't believe. Maybe Allison has further information.
Thank you. Councillor Vasilakos, so follow up on that.
No, my comment on this is today we're just allowing the possibility of using Tom Patterson Island, and so if we find that it's not being used as much, or if it's not supportive of the goals of the task force, or if we find that there is too much congestion on the bridge because they exist there, that these can be moved, right? So what we're doing today is saying we will allow the island to be used, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we're, if it's not working out well, or if it's not meeting the goals, that they can't just be picked up and moved somewhere else, which may be more appropriate. Correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Councillor Burback, then Councillor Bunting, then Councillor Ingram.
Thank you. My question was further to Councillor Gaffney's comment. I'm just curious about the picnic tables that we usually have out in the park system, and if there is a plan to put those out as well.
David, if you could answer that on behalf of Community Services.
Yeah, currently we'll be putting picnic tables back out into the park system. Not sure that we'll get them all out, but we'll strategically place them so that we can at least manage our main park system.
Councillor Bunting and Councillor Ingram.
Yes, I agree with Councillor Vasilakos' statement, and accordingly, I will move the motion.
It's already been moved and seconded, Councillor Bunting. Councillor Ingram?
Mine is more a technical question. With each of the picnic tables weighing approximately 400 pounds, how are we getting them onto the island?
Mr. St. Louis, I'm sure you can answer that probably better than I can.
Yeah, I think that we're going to have to assemble them on the island.
Yes, Councillor Ingram.
As a follow-up then, if we decide that this isn't the best spot for them, how do we then move them? Do we have to disassemble them and move them and then reassemble them in an additional spot?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's what we're thinking, that we're not sure that we could get them across the bridge if they're not disassembled.
Anything further? Just so everyone knows, they are being bought unassembled already, and we have a business in town that has volunteered to assemble them for the city. All right, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed, if any, and that's carried. Item 7.9 is a resolution. It's an amendment to the Traffic and Parking Bylaw 159-2008. And the staff recommends that Section 29.2 of the Traffic and Parking Bylaw 159-208 be amended as follows. And that is that by deleting, no operator of any bicycle or motorcycle shall ride on any sidewalk except for the portion of the sidewalk adjacent to the following streets: Ontario Street, east of Romeo, and the asphalted sidewalk bicycle path on the west side of Erie, south of Lorne Avenue. By adding, no operator of any bicycle or motorcycle shall ride on any sidewalk. And then A, the exception is bicycles be allowed on Ontario Street, east of Romeo Street, and the asphalted sidewalk bicycle path west side of Erie, south of Lorne. Mover is Councillor Vasilakos and Councillor Burback. Discussion, Councillor Henderson, Councillor Sebin, Councillor Ingram.
Yes, I went on the website and I was trying to look this bylaw up, but I couldn't find it. I'm not sure if it's posted anywhere on the website, but it's talking about bicycles will be allowed on Ontario Street, east of Romeo Street. So I just want this clear in I've got a couple things. So I want this clear in my head. Does this mean that's from Romeo to downtown?
No, east of Romeo Street actually heads from Romeo Street out of town. If it was coming back downtown, you'd be going west.
So it goes all the way to the city limits?
Yes.
Okay. So my second question is, it doesn't mention Olone or it doesn't mention Erie Street that have multi-use trails. It doesn't mention Lorne Ave that has multi-use trails. Is that in another section of the bylaw?
Okay. Mr. Dolovic, would you like to address the multi-use trail piece? And just as a point of clarification, the clerk has confirmed that it is on, the bylaw is listed on the city's website.
It is?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know where.
Mr. Dolovic.
Yes, through your worship. As noted in the report, we will be coming back with another report to talk about pathways, multi-use trails, and all that. What was meant for this was to clean this bylaw up, because we've had wording in the bylaw, and it goes back to 1968, where we didn't allow bicycles on any sidewalk in the city. And it looks like in 2008, when an amendment was made, someone wanted to include bicycles to be allowed on the two streets that you've mentioned. However, they just added it to the line that talked about bicycles and motorcycles not being allowed. So what we're trying to do here is clean this up quickly to eliminate allowing motorcycles on sidewalks, because I'm sure that wasn't the intent at the time. And that staff will be coming back with a report that will talk about what our pathways, because right now the way our bylaw is written, you can't even ride a bike on a multi-use trail. So we will come back with a new bylaw that talks about what is a multi-use trail, the intent of multi-use trails. We'll also talk about wheel size. There was some discussion in the past by council where they suggested that children's bikes, smaller diameter bicycles, be allowed on sidewalks. Unfortunately, there was never any direction given to staff. So what we want to do is come back with a fulsome report that will cover off all of the issues with respect to bicycles and active transportation, as things have changed quite a bit since this bylaw passed to the updated bylaw back in 2008. So there will be another report coming in the future over the next couple of months that will be making a number of recommendations to update our bylaw.
Thank you. I had Councillor Seven, then Councillor Ingram.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Dulovic just cleared that up. I just wanted to clarify for people following this at home that it's simply to change sort of oversight, and that it's just the motorcycle piece and that nothing else is changing. I just wanted to clarify that. So.
Thank you, Councillor Seven. Councillor Ingram, then Councillor Gaffney.
Thank you. So as Mr. Dulovic has just mentioned, in the report coming forward, I have had a couple of emails over the past weekend, I guess, regarding this issue, and they would like to see Duro Street, Romeo Street, the remainder of Ontario Street, and the remainder of Erie Street, as well as Huron, especially where the bridge portion is. They would like to have those added as areas where you can actually have your bicycle on the sidewalk because of the traffic and parking concerns. So if those could just be noted for Mr. Dulovic.
Thank you, Councillor Ingram. Councillor Gaffney.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. And that sort of was going to be my inquiry. When we're looking at things like multi-use trails, etc., are there other places in the city, not just the stretch between Romeo and the Ontario Street entrance to the city? Is that the only place where we should be looking at providing an alternative for some bike riders on some of the busier and heavier traffic streets? That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Vasilakos, and then Councillor Henderson.
Just as a follow-up to that, I know it'll come back in the report just as a note to make that some places what they're saying is if a road is 50, it allows people on the sidewalk, and if a road is 40, less than that. So some of the regulations, rather than identifying different streets and people trying to remember what street can I go on the sidewalk and what street can't I go on the sidewalk, sometimes it's related to the speed that's on that road, and 50, usually if it's a 50, you can be on the sidewalk, and if it's anything less, it's residential and it's fine. So I'm just going to throw that as a possibility for consideration in the staff report.
Thank you. Councillor Henderson and Councillor Clifford.
I'd like to see something in there that explains, now my understanding the rules of the road are, if you're on a sidewalk with your bicycle and you encounter pedestrians, say, coming towards you, or you're going to pass them, that you're supposed to get off your bicycle, walk past them. I'd like to see that as somehow part of this. I've seen, downtown they have those signs that say, you're supposed to walk your bike, and I've noticed, I think it's along the River Drive, they have it, a sign down there, something about walking bikes. So I think it could be part of this bylaw.
Thank you. Councillor Clifford.
Yeah, I was going to ask Ed, whoever, if someone is riding on the sidewalk, in a sidewalk where they're not supposed to be riding, is it the police that stops them, or a bylaw officer? Like, who's in charge of policing it?
Police. Councillor Vasilakos, then Councillor Burback, I believe, is next. Go ahead.
I was just a follow-up to that. When we did have Stratford Police Service would come to ATAC, and there was a conversation around that, and they did say the police use their discretion when they actually look at who's on the sidewalk and whether it's children or a tricycle or how people are riding. So they do. At the time they considered it an education piece and also using their discretion, but it was the police that did that.
Councillor Burback.
Thank you. Yeah, further to Councillor Vasilakos' earlier statement about doing it in attachment to the speed limit. This actually makes a strong case for lowering speed limit on residential roads to 40, and that way we know that bicycles on residential streets will be on the road where it's actually safer for them to be, and the pedestrians can have the use of the sidewalk.
Thank you. Council, anyone else? Okay, the motion has been moved and seconded. Councillor Seven?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of the points. I just would, I think we should emphasize sort of simplicity for whatever we do come up with. I think it'd be, enforcement is sort of, I don't know, as Councillor Bakis-Lakos was saying, it's not, I've never seen enforcement for that. And I think it's a lot of common courtesy that goes, I would think more so for something like this. So I think the simpler it is, the more realistic it would be to enforce. And if we try to enforce too much, then we may lose the whole thing. So that's just my thoughts on that.
Thank you. Councillor Bunting?
Yes, living on an arterial road myself, I see cyclists all the time on sidewalks on both sides of Mornington. And I would suggest that perhaps arterial roads could be taken into consideration as a whole, only where there's no other provisions for bicycles. If there's other provisions for bicycles being on the road, i.e. a designated lane, then arterial roads wouldn't count in that case. That's my thought.
Thank you. All right. Seeing no other hands, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed, if any, and that's carried. Thank you. Item 710 is private tree preservation bylaw. The staff recommendation is that council adopt the proposed private tree preservation bylaw and that bylaw 60-2003 be amended to appoint the Parks, Forestry, and Cemetery Manager, the Parks and Forestry Supervisor, and the City Arborist as bylaw officers for the enforcement of the private tree preservation bylaw. Councillor Vasilakos and Councillor Ingram, moving and seconding. Discussion. Councillor Gaffney.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have a difficult time supporting this. We chip away and chip away and chip away at what people can do on their own property. I would support it if I thought there was an epidemic of our tree cover being destroyed without consideration. I believe this bylaw has come forward because of an unfortunate incident or two of developers that have had or have a disregard for consideration of the community when some trees are being cut down. But to say to all the property owners in Strafford that we don't believe that you can be good stewards of our environmental tree cover. We've got some regulation and policy now on replacement of trees that have been removed by responsible developers, and that seems to go a long way to help add to our tree cover. So I just say that I can't support this because I don't think it's an epidemic that needs to be corrected. So thank you.
Anything further? Councillor Clifford.
I was going to ask, is there anything in the bylaw if you're adding like a garage to your, or adding on to your house, like a sunroom or a garage, anything in the bylaw when you have to remove a tree in that case? Or is it the same regardless?
Turn that over to Mr. Mr. St. Louis.
This is Quinn speaking for Dave.
Oh, hey, Quinn.
That's kind of where the bylaw goes. So if you need to put in a pool or you need to put it on an addition and a healthy tree, which is in the criteria of a certain size, certain health, needs to come down. It's not like we're saying, no, it can't come down. It's just there's a permit fee and there's a fee of a replacement tree to replace that tree. So there is some extra costs as far as if you're doing such activity or changing your landscape if you have to remove a tree to a healthy tree that fits this criteria in any case.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. Councillor Ritzma, did you have something?
Probably. Am I unmuted?
Yes.
Thank you. Just with regards to the replacement tree, then who deems where it goes? And maybe I'll direct that to Mr. Malott.
Well, if the tree can't be planted on the property because there is no more room, there is a fee, like a costing fee, so we'll replace the tree somewhere else in the city. So depending on the size of the tree or how many trees, they're in the bylaw, it actually has that criteria. So if you can't be fit where they're on that property, it just goes, the money goes into to the forestry department and we replace that tree somewhere else in the city.
Councillor Ritzma, follow-up question.
Just a statement, and I hear what Councillor Gaffney is saying about personal property rights, but certainly at this stage, I'm believing we need to have something in place because we have had some very unfortunate situations, and if we don't get something in place, I believe we're going to continue to have similar situations. So I know it's personal property rights are being jeopardized or at risk here, but certainly I believe something has to be done.
Thank you. All right, it's Councillor Henderson.
Yes, I'm just wondering how big of an issue this is. I know when this came before us before, I forget if it was like 8 or 9 years ago, part of the issues was the bylaw officers are already overwhelmed and working very hard, and to add this kind of a bylaw, will this mean we're going to have to hire a person to help out with this type of bylaw?
Mr. Malott.
In the report, and Tatiana may be able to talk to us a little bit more, we're going to appoint 3 people in the community services staff to try and regulate the bylaw. So they wouldn't necessarily have to hire anybody to enforce it, no.
Councillor Ritzma, then Councillor Vasilakos.
Yeah, with regards to Councillor Henderson's concern, the size of the tree that you would have to make application for removal of or destruction of certainly won't force every tree to be inspected, because at 30, it's a fairly large tree. So I don't think it's going to be that onerous for staff to undertake.
Councillor Vasilakos.
I was just going to comment that at the time when this came to council previously, and then a time before that, these tree bylaws were fairly new. They were used in larger communities where they were, tree cover was a critical issue. But in the interim, a lot of smaller communities have, most people, you don't really have a lot of issues, but you do have the opportunity to deal with issues as they come. So, from my perspective, it's like most things, as long as we do some education around it and make sure people know what is required, pretty much most people will actually comply with that. So I don't know that we'll see a staffing issue around it.
Thank you. Councillor Henderson.
I just wanted to comment on what Councillor Ritzma was saying. 30 centimeters is 12 inches, right?
Thereabouts.
11.8 inches.
Right. I guess I didn't think that was a very big tree. Like, they're just talking from one side to the other, not talking the whole. They measure it like from one side to the other side. It's not the whole circumference, is it? It just.
Mr. Malott, can you explain the measurement process?
It's diameter at breast height. So It's just straight across the tree trunk. It's not the circumference. It's the diameter at 1.4 meters from the ground. It would have to be over, or 30 centimeters or over to be considered a significant tree.
It is.
Thank you. All right, there's nothing further. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? It's carried. Thank you. Item 7.11 is the Committee of Adjustment electronic participation, and staff recommend that procedural bylaw 113-98, the amendment to add Rule 15, electronic attendance by committee members, that electronic attendance by Committee of Adjustment members at meetings shall be permitted for Committee of Adjustment meetings held during an emergency existing in the City of Stratford and declared in accordance with the Emergency Management and Civil Protection Act by the Premier or Cabinet or the Mayor for the Corporation of the City of Stratford, and where the member's health or the health of other members may be impacted by the attendance of the committee member at a meeting. Member participants through electronic attendance in a meeting shall participate in an enclosed room, ensure no other person is present. Members attending the meeting through means of electronic attendance shall be included in the calculation of quorum. In the event of an interruption in the communications linked to the member in electronic attendance, the chair may decide to take a short recess until it is determined whether or not the link can be reestablished, or continue the meeting and treat the interruption in the same manner as if a member who is physically present leaves the meeting room. No member shall speak to a question or motion until the member has been recognized by the chair. A member shall signal their desire to speak by raising their hand if participating by video, or by verbally requesting to speak when the chair has opened the floor for discussion. Every member present at a meeting of the committee, when a question is put, shall vote unless prohibited by statute. If prohibited, the recording secretary should record the name of the member and the reason that he or she is prohibited from voting. A member attending the meeting through means of electronic attendance shall vote by raising their hand if participating by video or audibly stating in favor or opposed. Where a member is not prohibited from voting and the member chooses to abstain from voting, their vote shall be recorded as opposed. Motion to this, Councillor Ingram, seconded Councillor Burback. Discussion. All those in favor? Opposed, if any, and that's carried. Thank you. Item 9.1 is a notice of public meeting under the Planning Act, and it is that there will be a public meeting on Monday, June 29th at 3 p.m. to hear all interested persons with respect to zone change application under Section 34 of the Planning Act, RSO 1990, for 677 Erie Street, submitted by Baker Planning Group on behalf of Rambry Management. The public meeting was originally scheduled for April 14, 2020, but was canceled in light of COVID-19 coronavirus outbreak. The full notice is attached to this agenda, and that is for the information. Item 10 is reading of the bylaws, and there are 3 bylaws that can be taken collectively. The first is amendment to the Traffic and Parking Bylaw 159/2008 with regards to bicycles and motorcycles on sidewalks. Bylaw 10.2 is to amend the Committee of Adjustment Procedural Bylaw 113-98. And Bylaw 10.4 was added from the addenda, and it is for the conveyance to 2742051 Ontario Inc. of lots 1 and 2, Plan 44-8-30 or 44M-38 with regard to the Wright Industrial Park. And Councillor Henderson and Councillor Ritzma will move that bylaws 10.1, 10.2, and 10.4 be taken collectively. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That's unanimous, so we'll go to first and second reading. Councillor Ingram and Councillor Seven moving that bylaw 10.1, 10.2, and 10.4 be read a first and second time. Discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? It's carried. And the third and final reading is moved by Councillor Gaffney and Councillor Bunting for bylaw 10.1, 10.2, and 10.4. Discussion. Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? And that's carried. Item 11 is the consent agenda. We have items CA 2020-054 to 2020-056. Is there anything members of council would like to bring forward at this time? All right. Seeing none, we'll go to new business under item 12. Councillor Burback, Ingram, Gaffney, and Ritzma in that order.
Thank you. I wanted to make some comments about an issue on many of our minds. That's the issue of anti-Black racism and our relationship to it here in Stratford. It's clear to me that we need to acknowledge that racism exists in Canada and in Ontario and in Stratford. We can see it reflected loud and clear in some of the online discussions that have occurred in the past week, as well as the stories that some of our Black citizens have shared. And this is absolutely unacceptable. We can also hear many white voices speaking out against racism in Stratford, and that's encouraging. Please keep up that work because it's only beginning. Black, Indigenous, and people of color in Stratford deserve our support, love, and reassurances that their concerns are being taken seriously and that racism will not be tolerated here. We see you, we hear you, and we are listening and learning. I've also been thinking about what we as a council can do in addition to speaking out against racism. Here are some ideas. We can work harder to create a community that's more welcoming, inclusive, and safe for everyone. We can work to embrace diversity in Stratford. We can refer to the 2017 research report by the Social Research and Planning Council entitled Embracing Diversity, which gives us an understanding of what some of the barriers are for newcomers in Stratford. And then we can work to reduce some of these barriers. We can also ensure that when we're celebrating city events, we acknowledge and celebrate the diversity of our community. We can also ensure that our police force has the proper education and a good understanding of the way that racialized people are feeling right now. I'd like to say thank you to Chief Skinner and the Stratford Police Department for the statement they released on June the 5th, renouncing discrimination and racism, and the commitment they have to work continuously with the community to make meaningful strides towards long-lasting change. To that end, I do have a recommendation for Mayor Matheson and Councillor Bunting to take back to the police board. I would like to suggest that the creation of a community equity action team be struck, a committee that could act as an advisory council for the Stratford Police Service on issues of equity, transparency, and community relations. This group could be comprised of people who live or work in Stratford and include multiple perspectives from the commonly underrepresented voices. Representation from racialized communities, the LGBTQ2 community, homeless outreach, domestic violence survivors, people with disabilities, mental health organizations, addiction services, City of Stratford employees, students, and various faith organizations could all be included in this group. A community equity action team would allow a two-way conversation to happen with both citizens and the police sharing the challenges that they face and coming up with a better understanding of each other's perspectives. Thank you.
Thank you, Jody.
I was just getting clarification from the church, the CAO. Would it be possible to refer this to the community safety and well-being team that has already got a number of those people involved and the police, and see if there's an opportunity it could undertake that work since it's already doing much of that?
That makes a lot of sense to me.
Okay, so you'll move a referral to that group of that?
Yes, I will.
A seconder is Councillor Henderson. Any discussion on that? Councillor Burback?
I just want to make sure that it would be a committee or council that would be run by the Police Services Board, not necessarily a city committee, that it would be part of their budget and part of what they do. So that I would think is very important.
I'm looking at the CAO and she will work towards that end, but we already have a number of the partners at that one table, so we'll sit and see how we can integrate the work of all that together.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. All right, all those in favor? Opposed, if any, that's carried. I have Councillor Ingram next.
Thank you. Over the weekend, I was contacted, as I think a handful of us were, by the Feline Friends Network, outlining some reasons why their grant denial has been such a problematic issue for them during this pandemic. given that we're already 6 months almost by the time our next council meeting comes, 6 months into the year, but moving into our 7th month, I'm wondering if we could get a report back to us with the outstanding balance on that grant budget line, and then possibly reconsider this denial for the Feline Friends Network so that they might be able to continue to do some of the work that they do. And for those of you who did not get that letter, they have not been able to hold any of their fundraising items. They generally have a raffle, and because of the economic problems with our economic times, they haven't been able to ask any of the businesses for raffle prizes, so they can't sell tickets, they can't go door to door, they can't do any of those general fundraising items that they typically do. And so I think it might actually be beneficial for us to review that denial.
Ms. Baroness is already working on this report. It would come to the June 22nd council meeting probably. And at that time, if we wanted to reconsider, we'd need a motion to reconsider passed by council, but that report is already in motion.
Thank you.
All right, if I could, if there's nothing else on that item, then I'm going to go to Councillor Gaffney, Ritzman, then Bunting, and then Basilakos. Councillor Gaffney.
Thank you, Your Worship. I've been contacted by a citizen with a tree that belongs to the city of Strafford at 21 Church Street. I guess there's been several years of interference with the underground services. And I know we have had, I'm led to understand that we have had staff look at it, but I've only gotten one side of the story so far. So I don't know if it involves getting a report from infrastructure and from Mr. Malott, or if there might be an opportunity to be had where I could sit down with those two people and just find out a little bit more with social separation in mind.
So any of the trees that are problematic and referred go to Mr. Malott in the Parks and Forestry. Because they're in the road allowance, they are covered by the Parks Board normally, and we can make arrangements for you to have a conversation with Mr. Malott with regard to that.
Yeah, and sorry, Your Worship, but I add, I bring up the infrastructure department just because it's interfering with the underground stuff and things. So,
yeah,
okay,
definitely.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Ritzman.
Through you, Your Worship, thank you. So this morning I was at our Stratford Landfill. Staff is doing a great job. It was exceptionally busy and I was there at 8:30. All bins by that stage were full. I'm just wondering through you to Mr. Dolovic, if we could give a brief update on the possibility of Saturday reopening.
Yes,
Mr. Dolovic.
Yeah, through Your Worship, we, in conjunction with the report coming on the 22nd of June, the CAO may wish to speak to it more, but we're looking at all the costs, all the servicing, staffing and all that, and the impacts it will have, and then we will include the Saturday reopening of the landfill and what the cost implications are for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bunting. And then Councillor Basilakos and Councillor Seb.
Yeah, just with respect to the Feline Friends, just going back, regarding that, the evaluation committee is meeting next Tuesday on that very topic. I just wanted to bring that to your attention, that's all.
Thank you. Councillor Vasilakos, then Councillor Sebin.
I was going to say the same thing. I sit on the evaluation committee and it's already on the agenda, the appeal.
Thank you. Councillor Sebin, then Councillor Henderson.
Thank you. I just had a few different items. The first is regarding the geese management program. I feel like this program began primarily because of complaints regarding geese waste along the walk pathways along the river. Since then, we've had countless upset people. I've had countless upset messages and emails. Many residents are no longer comfortable walking along the river because You know, and I completely understand it's not a good environment, especially if you don't agree with either the practices or the principle that they should be harassing the geese. And so instead of people going around the river and being inconvenienced by goose waste, we now have people going around the river who are either anxious about the harassment program or who don't go at all. Many complaints have been communicated in the last month about the conduct of the contracted company. And I know that it wouldn't be supported to get rid of the program, but I would make a motion to suspend it and have some kind of review, because I don't feel, I just don't feel it's serving the purpose for most residents in Stratford, and so I'll throw the motion on the floor. But
is there a seconder to second the suspension of the goose management program? Okay, Councillor Seven, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you. So my second point is the closure of Lakeside Drive that happened for the first time over the weekend, and I did go by around the river several times, just running around the river, and what I noticed was sort of concerning as far as social distancing measures go, and that is the main reason why we're doing this. What I observed, and I know this will be different, and it is anecdotal, but there were clusters of people grouped together on the north side that was open. Everybody was parked on the north side, and also the parking was full, what was left of Lakeside Drive that was open, and it was very compacted groups of people, and the stretch that was closed was all but deserted, and you could see that from the north side. You could see that when you were going down it, and it really seemed to be counter to what the goal, I think, was of that. So, I mean, ideally, I'm not going to make a motion for this, but ideally, I think the review date should be before summer's over, because that's when most outdoor congregating is going to happen. And so I have concerns around that. And my third point is just a question for, I don't know if Mr. Mosley is with us, but Mr. St. Louis, about when the bus shelters will be reopening.
Mr. St. Louis or Mr. Mosley, if in attendance.
I'll have to confer with Mr. Mosley on when those shelters would reopen. It appears today that things are loosening up, so I'll confer and get back if that's okay.
Okay, thank you. That's everything. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Seven. Councillor Henderson and Councillor Beatty, then Ritzma.
There was a big announcement from the province today, and it mentions a whole list of things that can open on Friday at 12. So I see it mentions swimming pools. How long does it take to fill the Lions pool?
So, Mr. St. Louis, I'll let you answer the question.
From start to finish, to get the temperature up and the pool filled after the repairs that we just made, we'd be 2 weeks.
Councillor Henderson, can you unmute your mic, please?
Oh, sorry. I missed the last part. You were garbled, sorry.
Sorry, through the mayor. It would be 2 weeks from start to finish to get it open.
So are we starting now?
At present, we do not have staff allocated for that because they're still on layoff. So there is a report that would have to come back from the corporate leadership team to recall staff to begin the process. And Ms. Thompson is aware of that, and they will review after today all the announcements provided by the province and look at them and the staffing levels that would be required to put them in place. And we learned, like most people in the province late this morning, of a lot of these things, which we now are not scrambling, but working very hard to try to get back in front of. Strategically. All right. Councillor Beatty.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a brief point to Councillor Seven's concerns he brought forward regarding the geese. He had mentioned at a prior council meeting. And so I took the initiative to meet with the contractor there to just find out directly how that contractor was dealing with our geese. And I will say that I was very pleasantly, I was very pleased with how he was handling things. I witnessed firsthand where he dealt with citizens addressing their concerns, and he used it as an opportunity to educate. And I believe that he's doing a very good job. I witnessed how he is going about dealing with our geese management program. And I can say that I feel very comfortable with what he's doing. And so there's nothing further I want to add to that.
Councillor Ritzma.
Thank you, Your Worship. And so just to follow up that comment from Councillor Beattie as well, on one of the letters that we received, and perhaps I can get reassurance, or we can get reassurance from Mr. Malott, the letter indicated that the management program included smashing of geese eggs. Could Mr. Malott address that?
Yeah, one of the opportunities he uses, and he only did it a few times, was he removes all the eggs, but in some cases he would leave a broken egg in the nest. It's just another tool to give the impression to the birds that it's not a safe place to nest, right? And to move on and to go to another locale.
Councillor Sebin.
So I just wanted to follow up to Mr. Malott's comment. So that is to confirm that smashing the eggs is indeed part of the management program?
We've asked him not to perform that particular task anymore. He just removes the eggs now. He doesn't leave a broken egg in the nest. The egging's pretty much finished now for the year. So the nest work's done. So now it's just moving on to showing a predator in the park and just giving them the illusion of a predator. At this point, there's lots of young and they'll be molting soon, so there won't be as much activity. But this molting process is a moving timeline. So there is other birds that will see these birds on the water and will try and fly in, thinking it's a safe place to stay and molt. Those birds, which aren't resident birds, are the birds that we're trying to deter from staying here at this point.
Thank you. Anything further? All right. At this time, we'd like to make a motion for an adjournment to a standing committee for the Planning and Heritage Committee meeting to commence. And at that point, Councillor Ingram will assume the chair for the meeting. And is there any questions with regards to that? We do have some delegations scheduled. Councillor Ritzma?
I'll move.
For adjournment to standing committee, Councillor Vasilakos will second it. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? I will turn the meeting over now for the Planning and Heritage Committee meeting to Councillor Ingram as chair. Councillor Ingram.
Thank you. I'd like to call the Planning and Heritage Committee meeting to order. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest or the general nature thereof? Seeing none, we have no delegations scheduled, so we will move on to item 4.1, and there is an addenda for item 4.1, including 2 pieces of correspondence and an additional delegation that we will deal with in a motion to come. So item 4.1 is the planning report for zone change application Z05-19, a portion of 265 St. David Street, as well as zone change application Z07-19 for 122 Birmingham Street and a portion of 265 St. David Street. I believe we have Mr. Bannon on the line. Mr. Bannon, are you available to speak to this application?
I am, thank you. We have circulated a PowerPoint presentation, which I will go through, and I believe Council does have that information in front of them. Zone change application Z05-19 and Z07-19 are before you today. Larson's Properties is requesting to rezone a portion of the property from the R13-27 zone to an R15 zone. And the applicant is also requesting special regulations to allow a parking setback of 2.7 meters from the exterior side yard and a parking setback of 1.5 meters from the rear yard. The applicant has withdrawn their application to request a parking rate change, and they have also reduced the required setback for parking from 3.3 meters to 2.7 meters. In response to the zone change application, the city initiated the rezoning application Z07-19, which involves 122 Birmingham Street and the west portion of 265 St. David Street. The amendment is to consider changing the existing zone, which permits a banquet hall, converted dwelling, single detached dwelling, and group home to an R13 zone, which only permits a single detached dwelling and a group home. The owner of 122 Birmingham Street does not object to the possible rezoning. Subject lands of Z05 are located on the east portion of 265 St. David Street, and the lands for Z07-19 are located on the west portion of 265 St. David and at 112 Birmingham Street. The property is designated as a residential area with a special policy 12 and is located within the heritage area in the official plan. The special policy allows for the property to be used for a small indoor banquet facility with a maximum capacity of 48 persons and parking of 24 parking spaces on site. The west portion of the property has been granted a provisional consent. That consent was originally appealed. The appellant, the city, and the owner were successful in reaching a settlement of the consent application. The settlement amended the conditions of the consent and included detailed design requirements, and the conditions required that the owner request in writing that the city designated the retained property at 265 St. David Street. Upon approval of the consent, the retained lands would no longer be able to meet the requirements, the parking requirements, and would no longer be considered appropriate for indoor banquet facility uses. If the planning applications are approved, staff will recommend that the special policy area be deleted through the next official plan review. There is an existing site plan agreement registered on title of the lands. Any redevelopment of the site requires site plan approval in accordance with the conditions included in the consent agreement approval. The area of the lands to be zoned R5 is significantly larger than many other properties in the neighborhood and can support intensification without altering the character of the area. There are sufficient setbacks remaining for a planting strip, which will reduce impacts on the streetscape, and it's considered an improvement over the 20 parking spaces that would be required for a banquet facility. The property is of sufficient size to accommodate all required parking, and a reduction in the parking setback will allow parking to be provided at the rear of the property. Planning staff are recommending that special provision is included in the R5 zone, which restricts any apartment building to the existing use building except for a small addition of not more than 10%, which would allow for a proper entrance or a more functional dwelling unit. This provision would ensure that the scale of development of the 6-unit apartment building will continue to be compatible with the streetscape, as the building massing will remain relatively unchanged. The applicant has been advised of this and has no objection to the restriction of the proposed use to the existing building. Staff are also recommending that the density is limited to 32 units per hectare to ensure that the existing building is not expanded to a point where it has greater impact on the surrounding neighborhood. This ensures that the required parking does not result in a significant reduction of landscaped open space and helps it to be consistent with the minutes of settlement of the consent application. For agency circulation comments, we have not received any objections from anybody that has been circulated. For public circulation concerns, 2 additional responses have been given to council today. The timing of the rezoning application was a concern. Residents were concerned that a decision is being made on a rezoning application when a portion of the lands were still under appeal to the local planning appeal tribunal. The written decision of the consent application was issued in March. Council was notified of this through a planning report in April. There is also concern that the additional dwelling units will result in additional on-street parking. The applicant has withdrawn their request for a reduced parking rate. Area residents are also concerned about the increase in density and that the apartment dwellings would not be compatible with the area. We do note that the lot is larger than many lots on Birmingham and Shrewsbury streets. And although the surrounding properties are predominantly single detached dwellings, there is a semi-detached dwelling to the west, and the rear yard of a 10-unit apartment dwelling is located to the east of the lands. The original property was used as a 3-unit converted dwelling and banquet hall. The impacts from the previous uses would have been more disruptive to the surrounding neighbors and out of character of the area than 2 single detached dwellings and a 6-unit apartment building. Restricting the apartment use to the existing building will ensure compatibility of the surrounding uses. Area residents have also asked that the recommendations of Heritage Impact Assessment be completed for the property at 122 Birmingham Street, and that the heritage qualities in the area are protected. 122 Birmingham Street is not adjacent to any properties designated under the Ontario Heritage Act. Further, a building permit has been issued and there's no rationale to complete another Heritage Impact Assessment for 122 Birmingham. The applicant did submit a Heritage Impact Assessment with the consent application, and the recommendations of that assessment have been included in the provisional approval. They have agreed to request that Council designate the retained property under the Ontario Heritage Act. Conditions of the severance also ensure that any existing boulevard trees are retained, and the recommended rezoning restricts the apartment building to the existing building. The recommended zoning would not permit a new building on the west portion of the subject land, which protects the view shed of the heritage designated properties on the west side of Shrewsbury Street. If the provisional decision lapsed, the proposed zoning would not create a new lot. A new application would be required to create a lot, and the subject property would still have a split zone. The appeal tribunal sets out clear conditions, and the city is bound by that decision. The property is still under site plan control, and the proposed zoning would then be in place. With impacts of renovation, a neighbor was concerned with the sandblasting and ongoing construction. There's no bylaw prohibiting sandblasting of the existing building, which has been completed. The owner has been agreed to request the designation of the existing building at 265 St. David Street, and construction would continue to take place inside the dwelling. And eventually, a new building is expected to be constructed on the corner of Shrewsbury and St. David Street. The zoning bylaw amendments are consistent with the 2020 provincial policy statement. It's in keeping with the official plan provisions and the intent of the zoning bylaw. It's considered to be consistent with the city's strategic policies and represents good planning. Planning staff are recommending approval of both applications. Should the Planning and Heritage Committee not approve the staff recommendation, the motion should include a statement outlining how the recommendations of the Planning Committee complies with the provincial policy statement and the city official plan and how public input was considered. And I'm available to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Bannon. Any questions from members of council? I have Councillor Henderson and Ritzma.
I just had one question. Now, my understanding is the severance of the land for Shrewsbury Street has been officially passed after the appeal. And part of what you're saying is that no trees could be removed. Is it possible to build a house there with a driveway coming in and not remove trees?
Through the chair, yes, it is still possible. There is, within the decision, they have to set back that dwelling back from St. David Street. It's shown on through that consent decision that was made, and the driveway would come off of Shrewsbury Street, and the front entrance of the building would be facing St. David.
Oh, that'll be nice.
Councillor Ritzma?
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. So just to confirm, Mr. Bannon, and I see it in your report, but there was a concern by a resident that the zoning application was still under review. That is no longer the case, correct?
Through the chair, I think you're referencing to the consent application?
Yes.
Okay, so the consent application, the decision has been made. They have to satisfy the conditions of the consent. They have been active. The applicant has been active in doing that over the last several months. They are close to satisfying those conditions, and we fully expect that they'll move ahead with that consent.
Thank you.
Mr. Bannon, is there a timeline on when they need to complete those conditions on the consent?
Yes, they have 1 year to satisfy those conditions of the consent after the decision through the local planning appeal tribunal was granted.
And so what date would that be? When was that 1 year timeline over?
The decision, I believe, was granted, and I'm just trying to check back to my notes here. It will be next spring. I can get the exact date in just a moment.
Okay. Thank you. And then just a question about the special provisions related to the banquet facility. So you mentioned that they would be revoked during, or you would recommend be revoked during the next official plan. Special policy is still in.
Yes, the special policy still is in place. We have not dealt with an official plan amendment at this time, or we're not dealing with it through these applications. If those applications are approved, then in the future, when we do a review of our official plan, we will be looking to revoke those special provisions through that special policy.
Okay. Are there any other questions from other members of council for Mr. Bannon? Councillor Gaffney.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, a couple of things. I thought I read in your report that there's no designated properties adjacent to 122 Birmingham Street. Is that right? Like, I consider across the street to be adjacent. So I'm saying there are designated properties adjacent to this one.
Through the chair, there are designated properties adjacent to the property to be created on Shrewsbury Street, but not across from 122 Birmingham. So if you wanted,
yes, sorry,
slide 9, Birmingham Street does not have a property adjacent to it.
You're right. I'm sorry. I misread that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Clifford.
I was going to ask staff just for a clarification, and it may have already been said, but has everything been completed on 265 St. David Street? I know he sandblasted and he took down the pillars, but is everything completed that was supposed to be completed, or are there other things on this consent that haven't been completed that we're talking about earlier?
Through the chair, through the consent application, all of the conditions have not been met yet. The redevelopment of the White House, or the ongoing construction, my understanding from the applicant is that they've largely done all of the work that they are looking to do on the outside of the property. One of the conditions is that they have to remove the circular driveway in front of the dwelling. Driving by that the other day, it looks like it still has some gravel in that area. We'll be looking for that to be removed. But I think most of the alterations are going to be to the interior of the site. If they're doing any exterior work, it would have to be in compliance with the recommendation, which is to only allow 10% additional space.
Councillor Clifford.
Yes. My question is, if he hasn't completed it, how can it, like, what he's asking for until it is completed, can what he's asking for be deferred? Like, we've had a history on this house, and when I read the complaints from the Chapman Heritage and whatnot, I have a concern that if we approve it, and if he hasn't completed, I know he has a time limit, but I do have a concern approving it until all these, everything on St. David is completed.
Through the chair, if you would like me to respond to that. What would happen is, if they did not complete the consent, if that consent lapses, we would be left with a split zoning on the property. They still cannot develop a single detached dwelling. So the consent has conditions attached to it. If they came back in for future development to create a lot there, we would still impose those same conditions on any future application. So the result would be that we would still have a rezoning of the subject lands, which would allow for the 6-unit apartment building, but they just wouldn't be able to develop the single detached dwelling on the corner of the property. through the HIA that's been submitted, the requirements or the recommendations that came out of that HIA all directly impact the severance of the land. They're not related so much to the White House itself. So we would be left with split zoning on the property. It doesn't affect how that lot gets developed. It doesn't give them any greater development potential for the lands, but it would still allow them to move ahead with a 6-unit apartment dwelling.
Thank you. Mayor Matheson.
If I could, the clerk and the chief administrative officer has suggested that we allow the delegations to at least present before we vote on a motion to defer or refer. So I just pass that on to the chair.
Thank you. Yes. Mr. Bannon, I have one last question for you from myself. Is there any timing on the heritage designation? Is it tied to anything?
Only timing relating to the heritage designation, like there's the HI assessment, there's no timing related to that. But for the designation of the property, it's tied to the consent application. So in order to finalize that consent approval, they have to request that through council that the White House is designated under the Heritage Act.
Thank you. And so from your previous information, that heritage designation would have to be fully enforced in full force and effect prior to the spring of next year.
That would have to be in effect before we give full provisional or full approval of the consent application. So it's not necessarily spring of next year. And just as a point of clarification, due to the emergency order, we'd have to check on that timing. So that timing might get pushed back from the spring because of the lapse date might be pushed back because of the ability to properly circulate any decisions.
Okay, thank you. That's clear. Councillor Gaffney.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I think my question is for you. The talk of designating this property under the Ontario Heritage Act, would we, and when I say we, would Heritage Strafford still do the list for designation? You know, the form that basically gets filled in when you're looking to designate a property. Because, and I ask because in my opinion, this property really no longer is a jewel of our heritage inventory. We've designated several Italianate houses, and we've got several more that are a lot more attractive. I don't know on a personal and as a counselor. Would we, like, is there some reason that we have to designate this property? Like, since they took the columns down and changed the whole look of the place, what is it? Is it of heritage value moving forward?
So Councillor Gaffney and Mr. Bannon, you can correct me if I'm wrong or feel free to jump in at any point. But I do believe this has been negotiated as part of the LPET settlement. Mr. Bannon, is that correct?
Through the chair. Yes, that is correct. It was part of the negotiation for that appeal.
Yeah. So Councillor Gaffney, does that answer your question?
I think so. I guess another thing I'd want to point out is that, Miss McKenna sent some pictures and some information to us this afternoon or this morning. One of the pictures shows the original vestibule. And I don't know if a part of our discussions we could say that we want the vestibule put back on, because at least that adds a little more heritage beauty to the building. So
Councillor Gaffney, there are some delegations still to come. Perhaps you might be able to ask that question of Ms. Baker as she presents the applicant's side of this potential application.
Okay, yeah, that sounds good. Thanks.
Okay, so let's move on. There is a staff recommendation that the presentations by Caroline Baker, Patrick O'Rourke, Shauna McKenna, and Anthony Wise be heard. Do I have a mover for that? Councillor Ritzma, and a seconder? Councillor Henderson. All in favor? And that is carried. Thank you very much. So I will call Ms. Baker up first. Ms. Baker, are you on the line?
Good afternoon. Yes, I am.
Okay, it's all yours.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to speak, and first time going through a phone call, so if I missed anything, please let me know. I think Mr. Bannon provided a great overview of the background and what's being asked and sort of where we are at on this property. And I know I submitted a PowerPoint presentation, which has been attached to the agenda for all of committee and members participating to view. I wonder if our time would be better spent if I can try and assist in answering some of the questions of where the various applications are at on this property, and a little bit more about the heritage component. So the consent application, as has been mentioned, was approved by the LPAT in January. We have been working on the conditions of consent, as Mr. Bannon mentioned. We're fairly close. Really, the key condition remaining that both the city and our team are working on is a consent agreement, and that's nearing completion. So very close to getting that finalized and creating the lot. There was some questions about if the consent approval lapses, if the conditions aren't approved, and the zone change goes ahead, and what would that mean? The way the proposed zoning is structured before committee today, it wouldn't change anything on the site in terms of this proposed redevelopment. The site-specific zoning limits the number of units to 6, and it requires it to be within the existing building. So if the severance lapsed and was not fulfilled, essentially this would just be a larger lot with additional open space. The way the proposed severed lot is zoned in an R1, because it's not a separate lot, nothing could be constructed. So just to address some commentary or concerns on the lapsing of that consent, essentially it would just result in more open space. It wouldn't allow any additional units or a larger building to be constructed on what we know as 265. The second sort of key theme in terms of questions was the heritage component. As Mr. Bannon mentioned, one of the conditions of consent is that the owner writes to council requesting the designation of the existing building on 265 and not oppose any designation. There is in the LPAT decision a list of heritage attributes that had been proposed by the heritage consultants and that had been agreed upon between all parties. That is a public document, but just for some information, it spoke to the rectangular residence with a hip roof. It talked about the symmetrical front facade with a central entrance, the elevations with arched openings, the central front entrance, the Italianate brickwork, and the large open lot surrounding the dwelling. Just for that bit of background, that of course would be under the city's ultimate recommendation and council in terms of what would be considered a heritage attribute, but certainly that would be what would be proposed by the applicant. So the process that will be moving forward is the applicant will submit a letter to council and it'll go through the normal approvals process for a heritage designation. I did just want to add a few little pieces on commentary on planning opinion. In my opinion, this does represent good land use planning. It's utilizing an existing building within the core area of Stratford. It has services. It does not require any modifications to the building. And I think just some discussion on compatibility with some surrounding single detached dwellings. This building will retain its existing character, form, height, and appearance. And the proposed parking lot to support it is in fact smaller than what was there. Therefore, returning it to a residential state when it was previously a banquet facility. We do have 2 proposed site-specific regulations for parking that will bring the parking a little bit closer to Birmingham Street. As noted, the owner is looking at providing a landscape strip for buffering, and it also is in keeping with the character along Birmingham. With the residential nature, there are existing cars parked within driveways that come off of Birmingham, and the driveways connect to the roadway, providing cars just as close, if not closer, to the sidewalk in Birmingham than is proposed on this development site. So I think that's all I have for now, but I'm happy to answer any questions or clarification on the various applications or processes.
Thank you, Ms. Baker. Are there any questions from council members at this time? Councillor Gaffney.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, I'd like to ask in relation to parking. And I'm not sure if this is for Ms. Baker or for Mr. Lewinson or Jeff, either Jeff. The semicircular driveway at the on the St. David's side, there would be no parking in that area, considering they're providing the allowable limit off of Birmingham Street.
I can certainly answer that through the chair. The intent is that there would be no parking in what would be considered the front yard facing St. David Street.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Baker. Any other questions from committee members? Okay, seeing none, let's go on to our next delegation, Patrick O'Rourke. Patrick, are you on the line and available to speak?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Absolutely. Go ahead, please.
Okay, great. Thank you. I wanted to thank Mayor and Council and Committee Chair for this opportunity. I really don't have much to say about the Birmingham Street lot. Mr. Bannon mentioned a building permit has been issued, but in fact, a structure has been built. And a lot of people, it's unfortunate that heritage impact assessment and requirements to be compatible to the neighborhood appear to be ignored. But in any event, it's a moot point. The other 2 applications, the east and west parts of 265 St. David, we think should be denied, at least deferred. Mr. Bannon and Ms. Baker and others seem to think that this severance is all but a done deal. That's all that's left is for a few more steps to be made and it'll be complete. But in fact, there are 15 conditions. The LPAT decision approved the settlement, provided a provisional consent. There are 15 conditions yet to be met. If they're not met, then as has been stated, the approval will lapse. But if the rezoning occurs first, you will have a split zoned lot. And that just, to us, seems to be an unwise position, particularly in a case where the city has no control over the outcome. And from my understanding, there have been cases in the past where provisional consents never became final consents because the owner didn't comply with the necessary conditions. There's also been talk about condition in the provisional consent and the settlement about the owner being required to request the city designate the property. To answer Mr. Gaffney's question, that's a request to the city. I would presume that the city would then do as the Ontario Heritage Act provides, issue a notice of intent, refer the matter to the Heritage Committee, and then make a final decision. At that point, at the time of the notice of intent, there would be some protection. Until then, there is none. And despite what's said, the concept plan presented with the management report, the concept plan that's in the PowerPoint attached to the agenda, show alterations to the facade of the building, new doors. In some cases, apparently where the windows are. Don't know for sure because there are no elevations. They also propose a 10% addition. There's no discussion in the management report of how those renovations, alterations might affect the heritage attributes that have been agreed to. In effect, if the renovations, the alterations can adversely impact those attributes, the whole commitment to request designation is really a moot point because the reasons for designation will have been altered. That condition that the owner make the request was a key part of the settlement in which the city played a very important role. It just seems to us, we do not understand why staff would recommend or committee or council would approve an action that effectively undermines a commitment that the city worked hard to obtain. Over the last 4 plus years, the owner has obtained a whole host of approvals on this property, as Councillor Clifford noted. Site plan agreements were changed to allow removal of fencing and landscaping, to demolish the garage, to demolish the columns, and then the city granted the approval of the severance of the Birmingham lot. In all these cases, the owner said, if this happens, I'll restore the building. It'll look great. All you need to do is drive down Birmingham Street, and you know that's simply not the case. The provisional consent for Shrewsbury contains another long list of commitments and conditions. Why would the city approve yet another new plan when these earlier commitments, including those set out in an LPAT decision, have not been fulfilled? The answer, according to the planning department, is the applications are consistent with the provincial planning statement, official plan. Development is appropriate, public input is considered. Those are Planning Act criteria. And I'm not a planner, but it's hard to me to see how creating the risk of split zoning, allowing alterations that undermine a condition of an LPAT decision, are consistent with provincial planning statement or good planning. Further, it says all public input is considered. Well, all public input opposed the application. It's not considering it to ignore it. But in any event, this is more than just technical planning. That's why it's a council decision for you to make. It's not a technical matter where staff can read the act and apply criteria such as issuing a building permit. It involves an element of policy. And I believe council has the authority and the responsibility to consider whether approval would be good municipal policy. In my respectful opinion, it is not good policy to approve rezoning a lot that does not legally exist and may never legally exist, especially when the city has no control over that. Neither is a good policy to approve rezoning that will allow renovations and alterations and additions that could alter the exterior of the building, the exterior heritage characteristics, and adversely impact in it. A settlement approved by the local planning and appeal tribunal, particularly when the city invested a considerable amount of staff time and legal counsel time in achieving that settlement. Nor is it good policy to approve yet another plan for the property when the owner has failed to fulfill commitments made in earlier approvals, not the least of which is the settlement agreement. regardless of whether the applications comply with the Planning Act. As a matter of good municipal policy, council should deny, or at least defer it until the owner meets his existing commitments. On that point, according to Mr. Bannon and Ms. Baker, that's well on its way. So, not to put too fine a point on it, what's the harm in waiting until it's fully done and the city has a legal lot and there is no confusion about whether commitments have been made? I'd be happy to answer any questions council members or the chair may have.
Thank you, Mr. O'Rourke. Are there any questions from members of committee? Councillor Vasilakos.
I had a question for Mr. O'Rourke. Your main objection, as I see it, is that we have parallel applications that are currently at play, and so you would want to see those other applications or consents completed before a decision is rendered on the zoning. And would you have objections to the zoning if the conditions of the other consent were met, specifically around the designation?
I have some questions about whether this is in fact appropriate given the lack of information about the proposed changes to the property. But you're correct, my main concern is this is a premature application, and it in effect just adds to a long list of things that the owner is promising to do at some future point. I would recommend council say, you got enough on your plate, finish it, and then we'll talk about something new.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. O'Rourke. Any other questions from members of committee for Mr. O'Rourke? Councillor Henderson.
I'm just confused by what Mr. O'Rourke is talking about, because if you don't do the zoning change, how does he move forward? Am I not understanding that properly?
My position is that before getting a rezoning, he should finish the commitments he made in the LPAT settlement regarding the severance of the lot. And until that happens, the request for rezoning is premature.
Okay, thank you, members of committee. Thank you, Mr. O'Rourke. Let's move on to our third delegation now, Ms. Shauna McKenna. Ms. McKenna, are you on the line and available to speak?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead, please.
Great, thank you. Hello, good afternoon, Mayor, Council, Heritage Planning Committee, and listening citizens. I'm afraid many of the points have been covered that I've made, but I'm going to go through them anyway, so bear with me. I have one or two insertions to make. I would urge that the application 70519, the east part of 265 St. David, and Z0719, west part of 265 St. David, be denied. They should certainly be deferred. There's already a new building at 122 Birmingham Street, so I assume the application concerning that lot is housekeeping. Though page 4 of the management report detailing the site characteristics states that lot is vacant. It is not vacant. My reasons first for deferment. There seems to be a lot of horse before the cart urging before being made by staff. My understanding is that the severance on the northeast portion of 265 St. David, siding on Shrewsbury, is attached to conditions. It is provisional consent. And one of those conditions being that the owner will, quote, request in writing that the city designate the retained property as 265 St. David Street under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act on page 7 of the management report. Has this condition been met? Well, I gather it is in the process, but they have not yet satisfied those conditions. Will the application for designation come in after the building has been altered for a 6-unit apartment? That does not sound like designation to me. There is a proposal to remove a side window facing Birmingham, replace it with a door, and put a covered porch over it. No other entrances, and I think there are 5 in the plan, have covered porches. Has the front door been shifted from St. David Street to Birmingham Street now? Is this asymmetry and switching windows for doors considered designated? Because part of the whole Italian quality of this building now is symmetry with a prominent front door entrance. There's mention of a small addition of not more than 10% to allow for a proper entrance or more functional dwelling unit. This is not using only the, quote, existing building. Is this to add a front closed-in stoop like the one that was built in the 1880s, shown in the photo the applicant publicized when wishing to remove the pillars? Or is it at the side? Which comes first, the add-ons or the designation? That's my concern. Also, because you talked about whether it's split zoning, that there's no real change. The change is that there's nothing to protect 265 St. David, which has been the beginning of this long struggle. Also, the side yard on Birmingham was part of this designation agreement and was to be preserved. Does this mean what it was before the lot on Birmingham was severed? With lawn and plantings right up to the pedestrian walkway that comes from the back side door, or what it is now. The cars are currently parked a good 2 meters past that pedestrian brick walk and right up to that back door. On occasion, cars have been parked halfway up the side lawn. Is this preserving the side lawn? The condition of a designation should be met before the Shrewsbury lot is actually considered severed and plans for apartments in the existing building proceed. Now, should council decide not to defer and proceed with the conditions for the second severance being met, my concerns about rezoning are as follows. At the moment, the zoning allows for a banquet hall or 3 converted dwellings, which is what I'm assuming is how the building is being rented out now to conform to current zoning bylaws. Now, there are lights on both floors throughout the house at night, but perhaps those 3 units are very large. With 1.5 parking spaces per unit, there are now enough spaces for 5 cars. At the moment, parking needs are being met, the zoning needs no change. There's no banquet hall in operation. But the proposed apartment building has 6 units, and the applicant has changed his application from 6 to 9 parking spaces to prevent parking on the street. Insertion number 1 here. I had a question from last week that was answered this morning after I had submitted this by Mr. Bannon, understanding that the applicant was going to request a reduction to 6 parking spaces, but, quote, the planning staff expressed concerns about that reduction and the request was removed. I myself would be in favor of a reduction in parking spaces to the 6 because that's about what the size would allow. My biggest concern about the 6-unit apartment building is the increased use of the side lawn for parking. First, there was, now the applicant's request for a 3.3 meter setback with parking no closer to the road than it is now, quote. There was no parking at all there when I moved across the road before the applicant removed the fence and plantings. There was a 1-space loading dock for brief drop-offs during the day. 3.3 meters was already too close to the road. The applicant now wants a 2.7 setback, even closer to the road and very close to the mature city tree that grows there. Now, I know Ms. Baker said that there's parking in driveways that are close to the sidewalk. They're perpendicularly parked to Birmingham, not horizontally. In the next lot, they are horizontal. That is a whole lot. At one point, I think Mr. Bannon said the back banquet hall would be more disruptive to the neighborhood. It was not. It also says that it said there will be a 1.5 meter planting strip for screening. Now the drawing says it will connect to the existing shrubbery. That shrubbery is no longer there. There isn't any on that side. And if the current state of the remaining privet hedges scattered around the property are any indication, that is no screening at all. There were often 7 and 8 vehicles parked overnight this past winter and spring for a 3-unit building. It was noisy, crammed, and ugly. Is there a maximum limit for parking? If there are that many vehicles with motorcycles in the back for a 3-unit dwelling, what happens with 6? Now, insert number 2. I, this morning, received answer to a question I left last week for Mr. Bannon. There are no maximum restrictions on parking at all. Basically, you can park as many cars that you can fit. The only thing that limits parking is the space allowed for the parking. So that was enlightening. Also, there was a saying that there was I'm just going to add this. There was something about it's an improvement over the previous 24 parking spaces. Those 24 parking spaces for the banquet hall were in an entire lot down the street, directly across from the existing parking lot. The cars now are further encroaching up and up on the side lawn, directly across from me. I'm in all in favor of converting the existing building to an apartment building, though the applicant has also stated that in the press that he wishes to build 6 condos there. Which is it? I don't know. But the current 9 spaces required are too many. I still have questions about the site plan, about the placement of snow storage, which haven't been answered. How can you store snow in front of parked cars? I would understand the placement of the snow if the cars were parked diagonally on the side next to the proposed fence at 122 Birmingham, but as it is now, I'm baffled. Last, although I understand that the lot siding onto Shrewsbury has a for sale sign up, even though the Severance has agreed to provisionally, and that the applicant wishes to make changes to the existing building on 265 St. David, I would suggest the applicant is still responsible for maintaining the grounds. He has tenants. If his current groundskeeping is an indication of the sense of responsibility to those tenants and the neighborhood, I have great qualms about him operating a 6-unit apartment building. Last summer, the applicant declined to add 265 St. David to the Heritage Registry, even as a non-designated property, because he didn't want to deal with, quote, additional regulations, quote, unquote, as he develops more housing units in the building. The applicant has complained in the press about red tape and roadblocks to his development plan. He has had settled agreements concerning other properties, i.e. Daly Street, only to change his mind about density after the fact. In the summer of 2015, after the applicant had withdrawn his application for demolition of the existing house at 265 St. David, he said he would rethink demolition if his severances, for 3, not 2 building lots, were granted.
Ms. McKenna, I apologize for stepping in here.
Yeah, I'm almost done. I have,
you have taken your full 10 minutes, so if you could just
okay,
wrap
I'm
up
done.
your comments.
I'm just finishing right now.
Okay, thank you.
I urge council to resist the understandable urge to be done with this once and for all, and I urge you to defer this zoning decision. All issues should be addressed and resolved before a zoning change is made, and conditions attached to the severance of the lot siding on Shrewsbury should be met so the severance is truly finalized. Then and only then can these applications for 265 St. David Street be properly entertained. Thank you for your patience. I would just say to Councillor Gaffney, when you said that this property is no longer a jewel, I'm glad you once thought it was a jewel, and I am afraid that that was exactly what the applicant's goal was. So that we won't consider designation. Thank you for your time and your patience.
Thank you, Ms. McKenna. Does any members of committee have any questions for Ms. McKenna at this time? Seeing no questions, I will move on to our last delegation then. We do have Mr. Anthony Wise ready to speak. Mr. Wise, are you on the line and available to speak?
Yes, I am.
Okay, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you. I'd like to thank the mayor and councilors and the chairperson for hearing me. Most of my concerns have been addressed by the other designates and also by Mr. Bannon about parking, etc. But I still think that's going to be a problem regarding the increased amount of parking that we're going to have there. I've, the same as Ms. McKenna, noticed between 5 and 8 vehicles parked there all the time. And if the size doubles, that's with 3 apartments, which I think there's 3 apartments there. If it expands more, that's going to mean 10 to 14 vehicles, and that's going to put a potential problem for any parking on Birmingham, as Ms. McKenna said. My other concern is regarding the care of the property, and that's been very bad. And I'm also concerned that the property was cut up. I was away for a few days, and I don't know whether they were looking for gas lines, or I had heard that it was a sewer backup. So the property owner is addressing problems inside and fixing up the inside, but is he addressing problems with utilities and sewers? Because if there was a sewer backup, the cut in his property comes right up to my property line, and would be going through the new severed property. So if there's existing problems there, I know when they built the house on 122 Birmingham, they did do sewage and water connection there, but our concern isn't the new property that's going to be put in there. It's the existing property that is the 265 St. David former White House, and what condition are its utilities in, and how will that problem be addressed, because that wasn't in any of the other information that we had brought up. And my final thing to say is that I'm also noticed that there's presently a for sale sign. So is all this rezoning a foregone conclusion? And if not, then we have to look at parking densities, upkeep of the lot, increased burden on the services and utilities, and these have to be addressed before any rezoning should be considered. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wise. Do any members of committee have any questions for Mr. Wise? Seeing none at this time, do any members of committee have any final questions for either Ms. Baker or Mr. Bannon? Councillor Burbach.
Thank you. So I've been listening carefully. There's a lot of details. My question is, we've heard a lot about conditions for LPAT. So the LPAT decision was made and there were a number of conditions, some of which have been met and some of which haven't. Can we get a more concise listing on what are the things outstanding that need to be done to fulfill that LPAT, those LPAT conditions? Thank you.
Mr. Bannon, I think I will turn to you to answer that question if you're still available. Mr. Bannon, are you on the line?
Sorry, I am. I just had trouble unmuting my microphone.
That's okay.
Yes. So some of the conditions have been met. Outstanding conditions, they have just sent in a package. They do have to deal with the circular driveway that hasn't been removed. Taxes haven't been paid yet. So there are still several conditions that still need to be met. The applicant, I believe, does have a list of them. Sorry, I'm just going to go through them here. They've assigned the address. I just didn't have them in front of me. So the majority of them still are outstanding. We haven't formally closed those conditions. They have submitted a package to us. It's still under review, and we'll be addressing those outstanding conditions in upcoming days.
Thank you, Mr. Bannon. Councillor Vasilakos, then Gaffney, then Ritzma.
Mine's more of a comment about the outstanding conditions, because to me it seems the most important of the outstanding conditions are the ones that actually impact the existing building on that is to be designated. So while there may be conditions that need to be met in terms of the new building lot, it is, if I'm correct, the biggest one that impacts what we're talking about today would be the heritage designation of the existing property. Am I correct? And do we know what the plans are around submission of that request to council and what it may look like in terms of the exterior features?
Through the chair, I can give you a more precise update on what conditions are outstanding. They do have to still submit for that heritage permission to designate the building. They have submitted an appraisal that is under review. The existing driveway still is outstanding. And the site plan approval has to be updated. They have submitted a drawing for us, but we haven't done any formal new agreement for the lands for the boundaries to be changed. That will need to be, the site plan needs to be registered, which is condition number 7. Condition number 8, we have provided comments on the consent agreement back to the applicant. That agreement needs to be finalized. And municipal addressing has been assigned. That condition has been satisfied. We need somebody to confirm the services on the property.